Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this Monday night in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Just taking a look here at the winds we saw today on Monday. We have several areas across the United States and Canada that saw some very strong winds. Your eyes probably drawn to the deeper low that's over the Great Lakes. That's a part of the blocked up, what we call Omega block that's sitting here. But there's two lows with a large area of high pressure sitting between them. So the flow kind of goes around it, something like this, looking like the Greek letter Omega. That's what's preventing this low pressure system from getting out. We also had very strong winds in parts of the southwest getting up into the Great Basin. And these two areas today just, again, incredibly strong winds and caused problems in certain regions. We saw coming right around the base of this broader trough, not only very cold air, but wind gusts that were 40 to 50 miles an hour coming out of the north and west. And it was a pretty rough go of it. Now, I'm from Illinois, so this just kind of hits closer to home. But I grew up in a town called Rochester, just outside of Springfield. And just south of us, where I grew up here on Interstate 55, there was a lot of blowing dust today. And this was put out by IDOT in Illinois, just showing you a massive wreck that happened there. They say it was initially caused by blowing dust out of a field, and then there was a fire that started. And this was a pretty rough go of it here, just to see the impacts of this blowing dust here on the interstate. So I wanted to share that with you. I was also watching this very carefully here on satellite throughout the day, and just to show you what things shaped up to look like today. Just walking you back through the day today, we have a large ridge that's opening throughout the Intermountain West. Clear skies due to flow coming out of the northwest here. This is convergent flow. It's very dry air that's moving in, very, very dry air, in fact. And then you can see the deeper cyclone here. And look at all the convection that's happening in New England. There was even some lightning in some of this today, including some graupel, some of that soft, spongy hail. And like we talked about, snow on the back side of this coming through the UP, also coming through northern Michigan and into Ontario and Quebec. Now, the pattern is evolving, and there's a couple of very important things to take note of here before we get into where this pattern is going to go in the month of May. First thing I want you to see is we've cleared this out enough to now notice that there is not snow still sitting on the ground, covering enough to at least be seen by satellite here in the northern plains of the United States. And that's important because if we don't see more snow being forecast for this region and we start to see the temperatures really warming up significantly, this is going to really push the crop calendar ahead here. We're going to start to get things going. There is, though, another load that's dipping off California. Much of the narrative we're going to have in this forecast video is going to be about the possibility of persistence of troughing off the west coast going through the month of May, and what that could mean for the plains and the drought situation, what that could mean for the Midwest. There's a lot of things we need to watch right now. But just to show you the area of the country that is still very much dry, we can pinpoint it pretty clearly. It's this corridor right in through here. We saw some recent recovery. That was last week with some of the rainfall that went through this area. But remember, that did not break the long-standing drought. So when you look over here in this part of Illinois, and we saw why the dust was blowing, the top 16 inches is relatively dry. You do notice, though, getting back into Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, there are a lot of growers in here who just established a crop. And we're sitting here looking at the fact that we have some drier soils, and we start to ask these bigger questions. What's the atmosphere going to be doing now that we've got the crop established and get it going this month of May? What is this going to look like pressing forward? Because if I show you what April gave us in terms of precipitation ranks, there are several places in that corridor that are approaching a top 3, top 4, top 5 driest Aprils on record. I'm thinking about parts of Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, parts of western Iowa, and this part of South Dakota, and also this corner here of South Dakota, North Dakota, and Minnesota. Now, we expect things to be drier down in the southwest and in California, but we need to just keep an eye out on this region because of the risk of having a weaker monsoon later this year as well. But let's now talk about the wetter areas like the Pacific Northwest or parts of the upper Midwest, where right now, where it's snowing, we're having the wettest April on record here in the UP. Same thing for this corridor going through parts of North Carolina, which we were worried about in February and March it being dry. We've now brought in quite a bit of precipitation, second wettest on record now, right here in this part of North Carolina. This is good. There was a drought issue going on up here along the kind of the East Coast, and we've now kind of knocked that out. But this bigger issue going on in the Central Plains is something we need to be talking about because the latest update released on April 30th showing the U.S. seasonal drought outlook. Just kind of match up the colors here. Drought remains but improves. We've already seen some improvement here, and we're going to be talking about what could be going on in this area. Drought persisting. It's a bit odd. I need to analyze this quite a bit more just to see why their longer-term forecasts suggest that this area is going to either see drought persisting or even drought development. I'm talking about Kansas, Missouri, Iowa. I would call that into question just because of the pattern I'm seeing in May. This is not a criticism of NOAA. It's just a different opinion. But I would be worried about what's going on here in the Columbia Basin, specifically the fact that we could, if El Niño is the most dominant teleconnection this summer, get some split flow over the west. So part of the jet stream goes north, the other part goes south, and that tends to make a hotter summer that kind of stretches from Texas all the way up to the Pacific Northwest. Next, we do have places that are very wet, and I just want to bring you up to speed on the flooding situation on the Mississippi and several of its tributaries, plus the Red River of the North, which of course flows into Lake Winnipeg. You'll notice that several of these USGS reporting gauges here are showing moderate to major flooding, and this is going to continue, but I wanted to establish that right now, the place where we have the snow is here. It's no longer on the upper kind of drainage basin for those rivers, except in this part of Wisconsin and right here in parts of Minnesota. Now, since we're talking briefly about snow, I have a better map to show you what's going on throughout the West, and we've looked at it many times this winter, but this is the newest update from NRCS, and this is just looking at snow water equivalent, and it's in percentage, so we're just comparing this to historical averages. We have a lot of places that are still 150 and some places approaching 400% of normal snowpack throughout much of the Intermountain West. And you probably heard recently that the dam at that basically is holding back the water for the Grand Canyon. This is the Glen Canyon Dam. It's open and water's flowing, and that's because right now in the Upper Colorado Basin we still have 150% of normal snowpack coming down that river. So this water health issues in the West are just very important to continue to monitor as we press forward throughout the rest of this spring. Okay, I showed this morning, but I want to come back to this map and bring up the point again. Our last 30 days. Now, we've already seen this in the ranking map, but this is just another way to view it. And what I'm asking the question of is, I like to rely on model forecasts. We use them, interpret them, and look for where we think we can add improvement to them and show maybe where there might be some errors. But we need to always take a moment to evaluate their performance. And when we look at these longer range models, I just want to show you that when you go back to the beginning of April and look at its forecast to now, it picked up on wetter in the Northwest, wetter corridor in through here, getting into the Great Lakes and parts of Manitoba and getting here into Ontario. Then you see the wetter conditions from eastern Texas running up into the Carolinas into this area, but drier in the interior. So you come back and say, you got to give it to the model. It did grab the pattern properly, and that's all we ever expect it to do. Now, May is going to be a bit tricky. We're going to look at May differently than just looking at a blanket 30-day anomaly map because several things are moving right now. We've kind of made this a narrative over the last couple of weeks. For example, do you notice how the MJO plot, even when you look historically, that would be the solid black line, and then the forecast, which are these squiggly lines here, it is forming a circle around null space, which is right in through there. And the MJO is staying out. It's currently over the Maritime Continent. That's over Australia. Expected to move into the Western Pacific. We then expected to continue to move back and reset itself into the Indian Ocean. And if the MJO is on the move like this, and we talked about this last week too, this is a signal that the pattern is going to be going. It's going to be open. It's going to get rid of it's going to reduce the risk of blocking. We're going to see the pattern more progressive and faster flowing, more zonal. All of these terms mean the jet stream is going to be active, all right? We can then assess the momentum in the jet stream by looking here at this plot. Now, it's a bit confusing to see, but this is the equator going all the way to the North Pole, the equator going to the South Pole. Now, when you look at this, I want you to look at the dashed line first. That would be the average, we'll just take the scale as relative here, the average momentum of the atmosphere in the southern hemisphere, through the tropics, and then here into the northern hemisphere where our westerly jet stream lives. Now this line, the solid one, is where the current momentum is setting up today. And I want to just make a point. In the southern hemisphere, way down there, this is all part of something called the Antarctic Oscillation or the Southern Annular Mode. It's very strong because of how strong the westerly winds are. This is important for Australia. You come over here, and what I want you to note is that right now, the momentum here between 50 and 60 north latitude, so this is the northern Pacific, it's got a lot of momentum in it. And this also carries over into the Atlantic as well. So whenever we see that global angular momentum is up, this just tends to give us less of a risk of blocking. And even though we've had higher momentum lately, and there was a block on the West Coast, I think the pattern's going to become free of that and start to get moving again. And that's what we're going to watch here. So just zooming in on North America, this is the omega block that has slowed the whole pattern down, like we talked about this morning, bunching up all of these waves upstream. But as the forecast this morning showed and this afternoon's runs kind of reiterated, that pattern begins to shift. It now becomes a bit of a high over low block, and it's hard to call it a block because it is not going to stick around too much. What I mean by that is this trough is going to move that way, and this ridge is going to move this direction. It's going to retrograde, and that's going to eliminate the risk of just this getting stuck for a long time. And what's supporting this is the deeper trough that's off California, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes as a precipitation maker for the West. And as I play this out through the end of this week, the most important feature going into May, which I want to remind you, we talked about this morning, May is the wettest month for this all area that I just kind of circled into here. It's typically a very stormy month. It's the month we typically see the most severe convection in the plains. And to get that to occur, you need to have the flow, follow the contour lines with me, that come out of the southwest. Now that particular setup in the jet stream, which is what we've got here, is being aided by a bit of a subtropical component to the jet and some weak ridging here along the Gulf Coast. And all of these things together can work to bring the moisture pretty far into the plains and give us better chances for storms. This unfortunately keeps the West cooler. They need to pick up more heat than they currently have, but it will open up the central United States to warmth. And if you remember back a few weeks ago, I said, what does it take to get the warmth to stick around? We talked about the need of a larger ridge feature somewhere in Canada, in the northern United States. We're getting some hints of that starting by the end of this week. Now, what I will be watching most carefully this Thursday, Friday, Saturday, in fact, most of the week following, are these little subtle waves that will come off of the Rocky Mountains. They will be the source of the lift in the atmosphere to initiate very weak lows, but increase the risk of strong storms in this area. So then that moves through this weekend, and then we see another one coming down into the west here. What I don't like about this is what it does to the temperatures, what it does to the precipitation for the west. But what we do have to appreciate about it is flow like this, once we get out of this next 5 or 6 days, okay, sets up the plains for above average precipitation. And that's something a lot of us have been waiting on. Unfortunately, it comes in the form of convection, which means these are hyper-local thunderstorm events, which means not everybody gets all of that rain. But we at least see the pattern. Remember I was talking about troughs here, short waves ejecting around this. That's the setup that we need to draw that moisture back. So thinking about that, I just want to give you a 1-week sliding window of average precipitation anomalies from the European model. So this is May 1st to May 8th. All right, as we play this forward and these troughs develop, this is now just moving forward. It's a 1-week sliding window. We can just take this out here, and what do we end up seeing? We end up seeing wetter conditions showing up in the model. And if there's dryness in through here, remember, the model's not going to be able to pick up on the subtle features that could deliver the severe storms that could show up in this area. So where we were drier this week, we're going to be seeing wetter conditions going into week 2. And then I think because the MJO is on the move the way it is, we'll go back over and transition maybe toward the middle of the month to another drier time period. And then I expect it to come back on. You remember I talked about how we could see this pattern week on, week off across the United States. My evidence for that is right here. If the MJO just keeps making the rounds, takes about 4 weeks to 6 weeks to do this, that's what we end up getting across the United States in that situation. Now, the new European model is shown here. This is week 3, gets us out there from the 15th through the 22nd. And now what we see is more storms coming up here, Gulf Coast, southeast, but another drier go of it in the midsection of the country. That would be the week 3. You then go past that into week 4. Let me take this out to 600. Whoops, let's stop it at 672. That's week 4. That would take you from the 22nd to the 29th. We now see it opening back up to more storms again. So I think the models are responding to the movement of the MJO by keeping this pattern, again, kind of week on, week off with its transition from wetter to drier. That's also being echoed right now in the newest updates from the CFSV2. So just like we talked about, week 3 was a drier signal here, but wetter up the plains. And then week 4, we saw the transition. Now we're coming in wetter here and wetter there. So that, I think, is where we're going to be sitting with this. We're going to talk about temperatures in just a few moments. To complement all of this, I want to show you the new updates from the CPC. Now, they released these back on the 28th. They do it every Friday. but they have the more mild air in the Canadian Prairie, the Northern Plains, Upper Midwest. They do have drier conditions through here, again, but that's that week 3 time frame. They're wetter in the west. I think a lot of this is coming in the next 2 weeks, but I'll have to question if this really hangs around to the end of the month of May. And also want to show you their new 1-month outlook as well. Now, again, this was released on the 30th. A couple of things just to talk about here. Don't expect the entire month of May to be dry in this area. In fact, I would say that we'll see episodes of strong storms, and what I will be watching is to see if we can eat away at those drier soils that are in this area. I would also say that while we're going to start off May cooler here, like this week, this will not persist much beyond the end of this week. All right, that would be the way I would conclusively talk about the new May outlooks. Let's now jump longer term. There's been a lot of discussion about this map because remember, we are pre-season to the main part of the growing season in June, July, August, September. And therefore, there's only a few things that can be looked at that statistically correlate with summer weather. And two of those big things are ocean temperatures and soil moisture. We've discussed the soil moisture. Here's the ocean temperature part of it. What we've got going on, and we've talked about this a lot, is there is a negative Pacific decadal oscillation here. That's the warm water here and the cold water there. Now, if there was no El Niño, that's all happening down here, this would set up the West for less extensive heat risk. This would set up the West for a good accumulation of heat, but a reduction in the risk of fires. This would set up the West even for better precip in the middle of summer with convection. What this would do is this would increase the risk in the Midwest and plains for drought development. And the reason for that, typically when there's a negative PDO, the jet stream likes to dip here and bounce there. And the question is, does it get stuck or does it bounce farther and block? That's what we always worried about with the PDO. But at the same time the PDO is taking shape, we have a developing El Niño, and we've been talking about this a lot. We expect by July, August, and September, these ocean temperatures to be 1.5 to maybe upwards of 2.5 degrees Celsius above normal. And that is very, very warm. If there's an El Niño going, that typically means the West is hot. And the Midwest and the plains are stormy. And the flow comes over and down, giving us northwest flow. So I'm going to say this again. These two things are competing, but they are our only seasonal forecasting things. What I slipped up there and said was, when we get into June, July, and August, we won't watch this. We'll watch the sub-seasonal factors like the MJO, the position of the Bermuda High. We'll watch the blocking in the North Atlantic, the North Pacific, the behavior of the Arctic. All of those things control the week in and week out pattern. What sets up the whole global system, though, is the ocean temperature patterns, which are reflective of what the atmosphere is up to. My point in telling you all of this is that there's going to be a lot of narrative right now about which of these is going to win out. And I have to give you what I think is going to happen. I think there is a better chance that the El Niño wins out over the negative PDO. And what you can watch with me over the next 45 days is if these ocean temperatures fade and these get warmer, that's the signal that the PDO is losing ground against El Niño. If I am wrong, this will begin to get deeper with cooler colors, and El Niño will not arrive at the speed at which we're anticipating, and that will change the narrative as we get into June, July, and August for the central United States. But as everybody who's listening to this knows, right, you can have a year where there are drought pressures on a crop, but perfectly timed rains that not just save it, but make it a bumper crop. You can also have years where there's plenty of precip in May and June, and then it shuts off at the wrong time and the heat comes in July and can smoke out a crop. And my point behind illustrating these things is that there are numerous sub-seasonal factors that can make that occur. So please don't listen to any of us, myself included, and think that we are overly confident in predicting your summer weather. We are not. If someone exudes confidence in it, they haven't been doing this long enough. Okay, that's just my statement. Now, this is a rare combination, developing El Niño and negative PDO. And we've been looking back at analog years to see when that's happened. Here's the years I got: 1963, 1991, 2002, and 2012. Keep those years in mind. But then 1972 and 2009. Now, the reason why I listed the years off in that order was because 63, 91, 02, and 12, the PDO dominated. 72 and 09, El Nino did. Now watch. If I show you the El Nino graphic going back to 1950, let's highlight some of those years. 1963. This is where we were in the winter of 62-63, and this is where we ended up by the following fall going into winter. That was the developing El Nino. 1991, which is right here. It started off, if I can get this lined up here, and then went up there. So we didn't even have a La Nina that winter, but we finished with a pretty strong El Nino. What about 2002, which is right here? Very weak, almost non-existent La Nina, pushing up toward a strong El Nino throughout the year on 2002. And then I know a lot of you remember 2012. Well, where did 12 start? Come right down here at the beginning of 2012, moderate La Nina, but it finished with a less than a weak El Nino. Those 4 years are being looked at carefully by a lot of us. And I don't think any of those 4 years truly represent what we've got this year. Let me show you the other two. 1972. So in 1972, it started off with a moderate strength La Nina and finished with a very strong El Nino. What about 2009? Let's come right over here. Back-to-back La Ninas, and we finished with a strong El Nino. Right now, we have had back-to-back-to-back La Ninas, and we're expecting to end up somewhere here, maybe even higher. So do you see how the 09 and the 1972 analog years may look a little more like this year? Please do not hear me say that those analog, any of these years, are a perfect match. There is actually no such thing. In all of the scientific literature you can read about the atmosphere, you will find there's no such thing as a perfect analog. Doesn't exist. It's actually one of the most beautiful things about the atmosphere. Its nonlinear chaotic behavior means that it can't do that. And I love it. For me personally, I think it's fascinating to think about. But I'm just trying to make a case for what you need to be watching with me. All right? Okay, let's transition back into some near-term weather. Today's all hazards weather map. Again, this was all the blowing dust, the strong winds. This is red flag warning. This was on the backside. And here again is our frost risk in parts of Nebraska and Kansas. Now, this is a very late frost. Out west, we're dealing with all hydrologic outlook, including flood, high winds, red flag warning, and this is all concerned about snowmelt and what it can be doing because the heat's going to stay on in this area. What I want to show you next is what was happening this afternoon across the UP. Now, I know these maps are busy, but all of these up here, these asterisks, those are all heavy snow. And to the south of it, it was cold and windy with gusts 30, 40 miles an hour, all wrapping around that low. So when you see that by this evening, the high-res models are still showing snow in this area, it is possible to see some snowflakes fly in that area. Now, I'll play through this entire animation, which goes out 60 hours. And you're just going to watch two circulations, one here and one there. As we play it forward, those are the mainstay of where the main weather events are going to be. You do notice that getting out here to Tuesday night, we see storms possibly popping along the front range of the Rocky Mountains. This is shown up in the models. But you'd still notice that getting out to Tuesday night, we're still seeing snow in the Appalachians up here, possibly at higher elevation, New York, Pennsylvania, parts of Ontario, around London, Ontario, and that low just continues to curl. So don't be surprised if there's some wet snowflakes mixed in with this. On the other side of the country, though, just take a look. Look at the low that's curling up over California on Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. And we're watching this whole pattern begin to transition now, starting on May the 3rd. Okay, from here, I do want to remind you that later on this week, we're going to get the first kind of taste of the new pattern and the severe weather threat that it has. Storm Prediction Center on Monday released a day 4 outlook, stretching here along the dry line, parts of Texas and Oklahoma for the risk of severe storms. And this is where we get to kind of an important part of the forecast. This is a dew point temperature map, so it's more of a measure of the moisture in the atmosphere than it is the temperature, okay? And there's all that dry, cold air coming in behind it. Here's all the dry air in the southwest. Now, this is going from Monday into Tuesday and into Wednesday. You're going to notice already by Wednesday, we're recovering moisture from the Gulf of Mexico here. So if we play from Wednesday night into Thursday, this is Thursday 1 o'clock, Thursday 7 o'clock. This will be the position of the dry line. And there's a very weak upper level trough here, and it might send a shortwave out over the top of this. And what we're going to end up having is winds in the low levels that are going to be coming right across Oklahoma like this, with surface winds cutting underneath it. And that's going to shut up a wind shear environment. Now, should these storms pop and the low-level jet is this way with the surface winds this way, the storms will jump off the boundary and remain supercellular. And that's why there's the risk as this dry line moves out on Thursday night into Friday morning for the strong to severe storms in this area. We then see this going into Friday. Look at the moisture that's recovering down here. These are dew points above 70, getting into eastern Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana. And there's that dry line again. In the position of that dry line, I'm just going to play this out, watch it right here, okay? That is the most critical piece to understanding the storm pattern that'll be in the plains as we get through the end of this week and into next week. And we watch the moisture continue to recover north with warmer conditions. And I'm just going to stop this next Tuesday. Look how far to the west it is. Now, if that occurs, this is part of the May moisture transport we can get when there's troughs of cold, dry air here, pulling the moisture farther back to the west. And if that were to really show up like this, we deliver more storms into that area. To see it, we got to look at the models. I want to make a point that lately, the GFS has been bouncing around with lower skill scores than the European model, but right about now, they match one another. So when we look at the European model on the right and the GFS on the left, you're going to see some similar forecasts. We've already watched one low curl up here over California over the next couple of days, one exiting east. So when's the next system come out of the plains? Right there. Thursday night. So the deeper trough is sitting here. There's going to be a shortwave that uses that dry line, and you can see that just to the east of that arrow, storms are expected. Now, there's not going to be any, in this forecast, deep, big lows coming out of this pattern. We just didn't see that in the upper level heights. But we agree, the models agree, that rain is likely coming to Missouri, an area that is in drought, by this Thursday night and Friday morning. That will be top thing to watch because we know how dry things are in Missouri right now. So those are the storms on Thursday here, getting over into Missouri, southern Illinois on Friday morning. Now, the atmosphere is not done with that pattern. You're going to see that going into the weekend. We have the moisture transport here. We have the storms that are possibly going to pop up here, and there's more troughs coming into the northwest. So we play this forward into the weekend, and again, another broad trough of low pressure jumps out and runs across this area. And that's what we see just moving out. Now, I'd like to show you this pattern and how it stays active. Look at this. I'm all the way out to next Wednesday, and it stays active in here a couple of different ways. In fact, I'm going to skip over this. I'm going to come back to this and show you some precip probabilities. So how about the chance of picking up more than an inch in, let's go 10 days here. Let's not get too far out. That's the chance of getting more than an inch of rain in the next 10 days, inch of total precipitation. See where it's getting back to? This is critical to this area. Where's the wettest place is going to be? This is the probability of 2 inches. I now want to show you something a little different. Let's go to pressure, if I can find it over here, surface pressure, and let's look at anomalies. And what do you notice? Going into that week 2 time frame, about day 8, 9, 10, lower pressure in this area. This is all indicative of the changes we're expecting to bring moisture into this area. Now, I realize not everybody's going to get it, but we're still bringing storms into this area. Now let's go back to what I showed you at the beginning, which was precipitation, 7-day anomaly. Oops, that's total. 7-day anomaly, there we go. And take it out to week 2. There you go. This is what we're seeing for week 2. It's showing up very similarly in the GFS, although the GFS really disconnects those 2 areas and keeps it wet in the plains. Again, I will be watching this like a hawk to see if it verifies. All right, last things I want to talk about today. The temperature pattern and then some global stuff. We do see the pattern evolving like this in week 2. Mild conditions opening up east in the central United States. And here's the week 2 precipitation anomalies from the CPC. Now, over the next 7 days, as we watch the warmth open, we're going to have a lot of heat getting picked up here in this part of the Pacific Northwest, down into Texas. The last holdout is going to be around that upper level low that's finally moving off to the east. Now, to show you the temperatures, I want to give you just the 12Z model run, and we're going to be watching only for frost in this case, all right? So I'm wanting you to watch for this contour line. We're just going to pause this on the coldest part of each day starting on Tuesday morning. So right in through here is where we're expecting the frosty temperatures. As we go out there further into Wednesday morning, I'm going to keep a close eye on the eastern Corn Belt. Although you see most of this here, there might be a couple of areas of patchy frost around this because we could get those temperatures down into the low 30s. As we go into Thursday morning, you can see where the frost is going to be. Friday morning, opening up the warmth here. Saturday morning, right there. Sunday morning. Monday morning. Just go day by day here. Tuesday morning right here. And that's next Tuesday, the 9th. And as we get out there to next Wednesday, this is what we just need to see. How long do we keep this open? Is there risk of another frost event coming into the northern plains? Right now, through the first 10 to maybe 15 days of May, I don't see it coming, okay? After the one we're going to get this week, I don't see another one coming just yet. But we'll be watching this to see if any system is capable of tapping in some cold air there. To show you the ensemble support for the warmth, 5-day sliding window. Let's pause it out here, day 5 through 10. You can see the west is still trapped under those troughs and sees unseasonably cool weather. Broad warmth opens up. The East Coast, which is the last holdout for the colder weather on this side of the country, gives up that colder weather, and we just play through the middle part of the month with a lot of ensemble support for warm conditions from the Canadian Prairie through much of the United States. All right. Last thing I just want to talk about quickly is South America. And what you've got here is the next 10 days. Models did change up a bit and bring some more wet weather into this corridor. It was already wetter in the forecast down here in Paraguay and parts of southern Brazil. We noticed that there is some rain and storms coming into Argentina, maybe not so much along the Paraná River, but May is a month where the monsoon begins to wind down. As I showed you last week, the NDVI values are very high for this safrinha crop, and they remain there now. And so we expect the crop to continue to grow given this precipitation and temperature pattern going forward. We talked about the Iberian Peninsula. We talked about other places around the world this morning's report. We'll continue to cover that throughout the week. But I'll stop this one here. Thank you for your attention, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks.